of MyData 2021 interactive webinar, wherever in the world you are joining from or whenever you happen to be watching. My name is Teemu Ropponen. I work as the general manager of MyData Global, and I have the easier job today, that is hosting this webinar. Well, our agenda is exciting, and let's get to that in a minute. But let me start by reminding that we are indeed recording this, and we will be publishing the first 45 minutes of this event. So turn your camera off if you do not want to be at all in the stream. As we have over 170 people registered, which is wonderful, just take a minute or two to summarize what we are about, as many of you might not have been active in MyData Global activities. So MyData is a human-centric approach to personal data with a vision of a fair, sustainable, and prosperous digital society. And in this society, people get value from their data. People set the agenda on how that data is used. And for organizations, the ethical use of personal data is always the most attractive option. Now, for this to become a reality, we need big fundamental shifts. The shift from formal to actionable rights, the shift from data protection to data empowerment, and the shift from closed to open ecosystems. These shifts are outlined in the MyData Declaration, and of course, much of the content today is around those thoughts. And in the last few years, the concept of MyData has gone from a research project and from a side project of a nonprofit into a cornerstone of data policies and data strategies in Europe and globally, and has become an essential building block of a fair data economy that respects the rights of individuals, while at the same time recognizing that companies need personal data to create innovative digital services. MyData Global, we help together with you, our community, connect, accelerate co-learning, build partnerships, build better products, help shape regulation, policies, and standards. And in the end, we co-create the human-centric future. I'd like to thank everybody in the community. We are worldwide from day one. An international nonprofit, myself and some of us are joining from Helsinki, but we are worldwide, operating in 30 hubs and having members from over 50 countries, which is pretty remarkable. Big thanks to all our member organizations, some of which are present on this call. Thank you very much for joining. Without you, we could not be here. Now, let's start with the interactive session. And by the way, I recommend that all of you are free to ask questions and engage through the chat in the Zoom. But I would like you also to go to Mentimeter, to menti.com with this code, and tell us at first, where are you joining us from? So menti.com, and the code you see, 80798693. All right, I see a couple from Europe. Woohoo, the first Asians, and I see many people from Japan and Korea registering, so I expect more bubbles to come. Some early birds from North America. Can we get all our continents today? All right, now, as we're waiting for a few more bubbles. Okay, looks like 3/4 from Europe, 1/4 in Asia, roughly, and then a few people. Thank you for getting up early this morning. Okay, tell us a little bit more about yourself. In which domain are you currently most active? Is it mobility, public services, health, skills, identity? What describes you the best? Oh, humanitarian aid, wonderful. Okay, that's starting to shape up nicely. Identity seems to be the biggest one. Public services, definitely an important topic for MyData. Business models research, no doubt. And of course, privacy. All right, keep filling us in. It's very useful to understand better the audience of this this session for today and for our future as well. So let's go on with the content of the session, and I have now the authors of MyData 2021, Viivi Lähteenoja and Sille Sepp, presenting the essentials, the beef of this comprehensive publication. I hope you've had a chance to look at it. If not, you are of course get a link again in your thank you note. Advise you to have a look, and of course today in a short time we get a brief of the essentials. And with that, I hand it over to Sille and Viivi.
Thank you, Teemu. It's really exciting to see how many of you have joined us today for the State of MyData event, and I'm really looking forward to the upcoming spotlight presentations as well as the group discussions also later today. As Teemu said, I'm here together with Viivi Lähteenoja, with whom we spent a good chunk of time in the past months to reflect on the current developments in MyData, to connect the dots between different discussions and implementations around human-centric approach to personal data, and to package all of this into the State of MyData 2021 publication. And today we'll share with you some of the layers of the MyData thinking presented in the publication, and hope this will inspire you to explore it even further on your own, as well as together with your friends and colleagues. To start off though, I'll also share why we even invested into this work. To start off, we wanted to provide the readers a quick snapshot on the current state of MyData thinking and doing, and help them and you situate yourselves and your work in the wider context of MyData. We hope that this catalyzes also new work, both intellectual as well as practical, and increase collaboration between MyData Global Association and other organizations. As a disclaimer though, we didn't intend to provide an introduction to MyData thinking for entirely new audiences, nor commit MyData Global to specific positions on controversial issues within the community. If you are new to MyData, then I invite you to explore the different resources published in the recent years, as well as just get in touch with the MyData team and the rest of the community. So what kind of insights can you expect from this publication? To answer that, I'll give the word over to Viivi to take us on a journey of MyData concepts and big conversations.
Okay, here we go. Success. Thank you very much, Sille. It's been a delight working with you and the entire team for this publication. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I couldn't be happier to be able to share with you some of the great stuff that's packed into this publication. So Thank you. We wanted to use as our kind of springboard in this presentation, this brilliant visualization, thank you, Caroline Kwan, of some of the core MyData concepts, as well as some big conversations or things that are occupying us as people globally right now. So we won't have the chance to go through everything, but we thought we'd start you off on a journey following some of these connections and also how they're related to the other topics in today's Spotlight presentations. So on the next slide, we thought that we would start off with something that's obviously affecting each one of our lives today, wherever we are, and that's COVID-19. So the pandemic put on the forefront fairly heated conversations about the potential use of personal data in, for example, immunity passes and vaccination passes. And the choice between surveillance that's justified by public health concerns and individual and collective rights to self-determination, on the other hand, it's a choice that doesn't have to be either or. MyData is a way to leverage personal data and protect individuals' rights at the same time. And we'll hear more about this topic in one of our Spotlight presentations. On the next slide, thank you. As I mentioned, the questions of digital human rights, well, human rights in general and digital ones also are clearly linked with COVID responses around the globe. And beyond merely the important right to privacy, MyData is part of the larger movement in support of digital human rights that address issues such as the digital divide, digital colonialism, the rights of indigenous peoples and marginalized populations, as well as children online. And this last point, children's data, is something that we'll dive into further in one of our Spotlight presentations as well. And for the next step on our journey, connecting the dots, here is Sille again. Thank you.
Tied to digital human rights is, of course, also power and empowerment. MyData emphasizes that the current systems of personal data are asymmetrical and disproportionately favor companies and other organizations at the expense of individuals and groups of people. MyData then is an effort to change that. And that's why MyData Global's mission is also defined as empowering individuals by improving their right to self-determination regarding their personal data. One of the crucial pillars of that empowerment is also increasing the awareness about how data ecosystems and economy function, and helping individuals to make better use of data for both personal use as well as professional life. And that's why we talk about and invest into data literacy even today in one of the group discussions. Next up, we move to human-centric control, which is also one of the 6 MyData principles. Human-centric approaches are designed to enable and facilitate individuals to exercise control over the use of data about themselves. And we're seeing more and more that these ideas are put into practice across sectors, particularly in the context of cities. Local governments realize that they have the responsibility to ensure that the person's digital rights are protected and also enable them to meaningfully participate in the data handling processes where needed or when wished. By incentivizing also other stakeholders that are locally present and locally operating to deploy this human-centric paradigm in their products and services, this would open up the ecosystem for innovative services based on personal data. And next, from human-centric control, we go to individuals as the point of integration, because human-centric control is made possible only when the individual is this integration point for all the data that exists of them. That inherently means also that different stakeholders holding and using data need to collaborate in order to enable such a system. In MyData, we talk often about the importance of business, legal, tech, and societal perspectives that need to go hand in hand in order to enable such an ecosystem. But in the recent years, we've also seen that the design perspective is increasingly getting more and more attention. And the designers in the MyData community remind us that we cannot only think of the experience of the user, but also the experience of the partners and enablers of that ecosystem. And over to Vivi.
Thank you, Sille. So next, we find ourselves with the concept of interoperability. And in this publication, we understand interoperability very widely to include semantic layers, technological aspects, organizational layers, as well as regulatory aspects. And interoperability, one of the 6 MyData principles as well, is one of the critical aspects of making MyData happen and making it right. So the way we've spoken about it is that interoperability is really the antidote to current trends of data hoarding, of gatekeeping, and of lock-in effects, which unfairly advantage already very large and powerful organizational actors. And there are 2 major strands of MyData thinking and doing that rely on and call for increased interoperability. And those are in the fields of standardization and in the development of governance. But as we are pressed for time and we have an all-star cast of spotlight speakers as well, we'll trail off the journey of connections now and leave you to discover for yourself the rest of them when you read the publication. But at this point, we do want to show you the whole wheel, all the colors, and ask you, where are you most active in, or what is closest to your heart if you look at these MyData core concepts on the slide there. And Silla, the Menti is the same, right?
Yep.
Brilliant.
Well, I'll navigate quickly to the Mentimeter, go to the next slide, and then you can also indicate which of the MyData concepts are you most thinking or working on.
Can we see the slide with the words on it, actually, a little bit?
I cannot put the same. Okay, there we go.
Okay, good.
Right, interoperability seems like a big, very popular one. Digital rights, privacy as well, privacy transparency. And we're seeing some other words here as well, like consent management, data ecosystem, sustainability is the concept as well, which are nevertheless very related to the key concepts that are brought up in the State of MyData 2021 publication. Indeed, we see digital rights, interoperability, and privacy taking most stake here. Very good. I will move on right away. Please do keep on sharing your thoughts on which ones are you most thinking or working on. And I'll let Vivi continue with the next slide.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is a slide I just wanted to flash for you. We focused in this presentation on one part of the publication, which is the concepts and the connections. But I do want to show this also to tease some of the other great stuff in the publication and really to encourage you to have a look through the whole thing. So we have a great sort of dialogue between governance and standards as they journey towards interoperability, as well as some great stuff on the identified strengthening trends of design that Silla mentioned already, as well as cities and local governments. So do go and check it out. And then on the next slide, I think this is, I mean, I love the slide with lots of colors and connections, but this is still my favorite slide because this is where I get to say thank you to people. Thank you so much, first of all, to my co-author, Silla. It's been amazing working with you as always. And also to the MyData Global team, Riikka, Karo, Ansku, and Teemu for your support and sort of letting us do this amazing thing. We also had a fantastic group of people from the MyData community who attended the MyData 2020 conference and chatted to us about that and inspired us on our journey for this publication, as well as a group of people who read through a draft of this and left their invaluable comments. So heartfelt thank yous to all of you. And I already shouted out Caroline Kwon for the graphic design and for support there, Paula Bello as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Today's time for us is very short, and we want to move on to the next presentations as well as the discussions. But before we do that, we're really keen to also see what kind of reflections do you have on the publication and how you might or could be using it in the future. So let's go back to Menti. The code is still the same, and let us know how would you use the State of MyData publication, whether you might have already read it or not. So let's see. We're seeing a good share of different answers, still figuring it out. And some need to still study it and read it. We're very grateful if you do share this with your colleagues and networks. As it's been discussed earlier on, the insights have been packaged in that publication, but the work only also starts into putting it into use and start building on top of that, hopefully already today also with the group discussions. And I'm really glad also to see that there's many who are working either themselves or with their organization into putting these insights into practice, as practice also gives further insights, and in the end, it's important that this doesn't stay only as an intellectual, but also is put into practice. Well, thank you for listening, joining us here. I hope that you will take the publication, explore it further, and together then start collaborating on building on top of all the insights gathered. I'll give the word now back to Teemu to guide us to the next part in the agenda.
All right, thank you very much, Sille and Vivi, for all the work you've done and for that swift presentation. And thanks everybody for the feedback. That is super useful. We never let participants off easy. That's why we have those interactive discussions coming on. But before that, we have the spotlight presentations. Each of these fantastic speakers could, of course, speak for 70 minutes. But today, unfortunately, we have 7-minute briefs. And the first of these, we mentioned the topic of children and data. So we have Yasmina Byrne, who I've understood is joining us on this morning on a holiday. Thank you, Yasmina. She is the Chief of Policy at UNICEF and talking about some very relevant things that UNICEF has been up to lately. And with that, Yasmina, over to you.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for your time today and for inviting me to be part of this presentation. So I'm going to talk today to you a little bit about our recent initiative and a project we just completed, which is called the Case for Better Use of Children's Data, for Better Governance of Children's Data, or a manifesto So you were probably wondering why we developed the manifesto in the first place and why a manifesto about children. And as we've heard from our previous speakers, that data, if used responsibly, can potentially solve many social problems and challenges, but can also offer tremendous potential for innovation. But it can also present certain challenges both for adults and for children. However, children's data are significantly different to adult data because they're more vulnerable than adults. Their choices and preferences are still evolving and developing. They're less able to understand the long-term implications of consenting to their data use and data collection, and the choices they make today and the way they use their data can actually follow them through adulthood. So therefore, we worked over the past year with 17 global experts. I couldn't name them all here, from all parts of the world, to explore evolving trends and the next generation of issues related to governance of children's data. We wanted to highlight the gap between the world we want and the situation that exists now, and to analyze different aspects of data governance and the tensions that exist, and sometimes the tensions that exist between different roles and norms. So finally, we laid out a vision to encourage governments, businesses, and public and private welfare bodies to develop agreements, frameworks, and mechanisms for upholding children's data privacy and rights. And thank you for turning to the next slide. So basically, our key message, we have two key messages in this manifesto, and one of them is that harnessing of data for social good must not be at the expense of children's privacy, protection, and well-being. And our second message is that it is critical that that children and their rights are given due consideration and a central role in all data governance frameworks. So here on this slide, you see some of the key principles and provisions from the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we actually used and applied as a lens to analyze the use of children's data and how these principles apply in practice. And we are talking today about human-centric design, take the lens of child rights-centric design to data protection and privacy. Next slide, please. Through this process, we identified a number of challenges, and you can see some of them here. And these challenges range from emergence of surveillance culture, while profiling by companies and even state actors of children's data can damage their privacy rights and affect their protection and privacy and safety. We looked at how excessive tracking through use of services can also not be beneficial for children if this is not necessarily regulated through education, through health. We looked at how predictive analytics can exacerbate existing discrimination and bias, how children's data can be used to manipulate their behavior and through nudging techniques and their choices and options. We talked about group data for children, which is often overlooked in policy and in practice. And the balance, the difficulty of establishing balance between privacy, protection, and freedom of expression, and these different rights that I just mentioned. We also wanted to make sure that sufficient attention is given to evolving capacities of children and their different abilities, and that the current regimes address children's data sufficiently. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. As a result, we actually developed what we call this manifesto. We here have only a summary, a one-page summary of all our asks of companies, the private sector, welfare bodies, and parents and educators. And I would like to emphasize just 3 action points here because we are focusing today on human-centric design. Action point 2 calls for the best interest of the child to be central to all data governance efforts and to be given greater strength and validity than any other established legal basis for data processing, such as consent, performance of a contract, legal obligation, vital interest, and public tasks. So putting a child in the center and child's best interest is paramount to all data protection frameworks. Action point 2 calls for distributed models of data governance that allows different stakeholders to have power and influence over regulation of personal data, in this case, children's data, and with greater participation of data subjects, in this case, children. So what we are calling for, in other words, is a greater involvement of children in data policy, as such policy will lack validity. And our action point 8 calls for policy innovation models that enable greater participation and representation through, for instance, data fiduciaries or data trusts who act on children's behalf, or data intermediaries who use human-centric models that meet the needs and abilities of children in different development stages. So our hope is really that as a follow-up to this manifesto, we see some initiatives to translate these actions into practice. As a child rights organization, we'll aim to prioritize these principles in our work and our operation. But we also hope that to hear from you about some concrete suggestions about the next steps that companies and governments can undertake to implement these action points. So thank you very much for this time, and please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions or comments.
Thank you, Jasmina. I had a chance to just recently be in a human rights policy discussion in Finland, and the comment was that children don't always know best, but they always know different. And this was exactly the point, to involve in the decision making and involve in the policy making. So please find your way to the Menti again, what's on our minds regarding children's data governance. Okay, thank you. Keep writing if you are in the middle of that. We do have a MyData for Children group within MyData Global. It's become quite active during this spring. So if you're interested in the topic, that too is one avenue. And of course, as Jasmina said, interested to hear of any feedback and further actions based on this work. But on we go to the next spotlight presentation. So next we have a longtime advocate of MyData in the cities, which was mentioned indeed as one of the findings of the State of MyData 2021. Cities, not only in Helsinki, but also in other places, have been very vital. We see many opportunities in the context of cities. But I let Mikko Rusama, the Chief Digital Officer of the City of Helsinki, explain why are you so passionate about MyData in the context of Helsinki.
Hi Teemu, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Let's see if I can turn the presentation to presentation mode. Is it looking good?
It's looking great.
Excellent. So hi everybody. A big theme of our digitalization program has been how to transform from a reactive to a proactive city on citizens' terms. And to achieve this more proactive approach, we need to turn MyData declaration into practical implementation. I will share a couple of thoughts about that. Our city strategy states that we want to be the most functional city in the world that makes the best use of digitalization, and we have certain hypotheses. Firstly, if we are able to be more proactive and personalized when serving residents and companies or tourists, if we are able to automate all the processes and services we can and provide self-services available anytime, anywhere when needed. I believe that creates a feeling of more functional city in which everyday life is a little bit better. And of course, without trust based on more human-centric and fair use of data, this kind of approach is not possible. So we argue that we should provide services automatically, or at least recommend the most suitable service. If we have a statutory service, citizen or resident is eligible for the service, we have all the necessary data and permission to use the data, then why not provide services automatically? And I give you an example that has been a big success. This January, we offered preschool placement to all parents of 6-year-olds here in Helsinki with an SMS message, and the parents could reply and confirm the placement by a text message. If we look at the data, we had a pilot a year ago in 2 regions, and we got very encouraging results on the acceptance rate. So this last January, like beginning of this year, we made this service available, all this kind of concept available in the whole city. So we sent SMS message to 5,600 families offering a preschool placement, and acceptance rate was 89, close to 90%. That is remarkable. So if earlier it took 2 months to get a confirmation for the placement, and parents have to fulfill a paper or online form, this January it took only 1 minute to get the confirmation of the placement. So we turned the paradigm. This is a complete paradigm shift. Rather than people coming to us, city came to people. And now we have, last year we also launched city as a MyData operator project, because without human-centric approach to data use, we cannot be proactive. We got a great funding from the Ministry of Finance, 2.6 million euros, and we are collaborating with cities of Turku, Espoo, and Oulu, and have partnered with Vastu Group, and of course closely working with MyData Global. And the goal is to really understand how Finnish cities and municipalities can apply MyData principles in practice and build practical solutions and demonstrate MyData capabilities. And here is one use case I want to tell you about. It's about reduced daycare fee for families. By law, cities have to organize daycare services. And the second point is that parents' financial situations dictates whether they have right to reduce daycare fees. And annually, City of Helsinki is providing daycare services for 27,000 children annually. So as of today, parents have to submit the kind of proof of their income in PDF format or by snail mail to city's customer fee unit. And now the idea in the future is that citizens can authorize the city to check their income and from the tax authority's income registry, and that can then automate the kind of process of checking whether daycare fee can be subsidized. So as a, let's say, kind of diagram, the idea is that our educational division Casco will request a consent through MyData operator from parents, and parents hopefully give us consent for accessing their income information, and we can ask the income information from tax authorities, and then the process the request. And here is also something to note about is this new access gateway component that kind of will be made open source. It kind of it's a kind of a block for the data sources and ease up the interoperability in the future across trust networks. So the big theme of our digitalization program is how to transform from reactive to proactive city on citizens' terms. we believe that this approach will save time and money. It will make everyday life a little bit more convenient and better. We are able to detect risks and anticipate problems. We can improve well-being and health of people, even save lives, avoid fires, pipe breaks, you name it. And we can better estimate the impact of our services. So this is a big change, and we are now closely collaborating with Teemu and MyData Global on enabling this big paradigm shift from outright exploitation to human-centric use of data, and also want to promote interoperability on semantic, technical, organizational, and regulatory levels, as Vivi earlier mentioned. So thank you. So this was my very short keynote.
Thanks.
Teemu, was I on time?
Yes, thank you, Mikko, for that brief. Very well done. And now if I can ask Sille to bring up the Menti, and if I can ask you also, all the participants, what city health data would you be most interested in using through a MyData operator? So let's help Mikko and all the other cities succeed in making services that people really want to use. And I think that was a really interesting one, Mikko, that you mentioned, the daycare, reducing hassle from parents and at the same time reducing costs for the city admin. That makes for a good use case. Looks like schooling is interesting. What do you make of that, Mikko?
Yeah, it's if you think about our educational services, the education division is I think we have 15,000 employees, teachers. I mean, working on this sector, so very relevant kind of area. I think the well-being of Finnish society is based on excellent educational system, and whatever we can do to help in that is important.
Indeed, great stuff here, and again, the summaries you will get in your email. Thank you, email. Time flies. We need to go on to the next one. Mikko, thank you very much, and we're of course glad to have you and to collaborate with the city of Helsinki and with other cities also. Again, a very important topic. Thank you for taking the time, and thanks everybody for commenting. Next, we have Lucas Ilves, who we know from the past as a very sharp host of MyData events in his previous job at the Lisbon Council. But now for a couple of years, I think Lucas has been doing something a little bit different. And in fact, it's been a while since we've talked. And now, of course, there's been drama and still is drama and tragedy all over the world regarding COVID and the pandemic. And I think that you have something to say on this one. So without further ado, giving it to you, Lucas.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, and I'm happy to see that everyone's well. I may have been following your work quietly, but it's my favorite Slack channel after my work channel. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully it should go onto full screen now. You see that?
Very good.
Good. So quickly, Guardtime is a European cybersecurity company that's very active in the space of health data and health information. So over the last year, it's really been something of a roller coaster ride for us, both good and bad around COVID. And I want to talk today about a topic that Silla already mentioned is getting a lot of attention, which is SIEM passes and the very large iceberg under the water that's really behind the vaccine passes if we start talking about the data around vaccination information. But let's start with the passes. So on the right here, you see the Estonian vaccine pass. It's been live for a bit more than a month. And if you scan that QR code, you'll basically see this and a little bit more information. It's blockchain, sort of that's safeguarded on the blockchain. And it's basically, it's not too different to a lot of the vaccine passes that you've seen across Europe. You can verify it on your phone. This particular pass is being merged into the European system in about a week's time. And we have lots of different sort of vaccine passes popping up across the world. There are, of course, a lot of national passes across Europe, and now the EU Digital Green Pass. We also see some travel-specific ones, the Commons Pass, the AOK Pass, as well as, especially in the US, pass companies more focused on private sector use cases, such as admitting people to events. And these passes are interesting from a MyData perspective. I mean, in a sense, you might say superficially, it's great, right? People have their vaccine pass. Generally, the way that they're checked is you validate the correctness of the information on site, and that's that. But of course, there are a lot of things that are not so great from a MyData perspective here. There's not very much actual data flowing here. It's mostly physical verification of these passes. They're not seamlessly digital. The types of data minimization that we'd like to see in the MyData world, we're not really seeing. So if you look even at the Estonian pass, it includes some of my personal information. The exception to some extent is the Commons Pass, which does have some sort of minimization around a business flow where basically you would end up having a decision they're safe to travel or they're not without the recipient of the information seeing all of the underlying data. And there are some real concerns on a more fundamental political level whether we should even be asking for this information. But what I really want you to take away from this discussion today is the vaccine passes are not actually the most important part of the data. Because more broadly, if we talk about the launch of the COVID-19 vaccines, we could think of them as the largest product launch in history. And so there's a lot of real-time situational awareness between different parties that you need to have here. So how do we, for instance, link what's happening in the field with vaccines being distributed to the certificates? Might be easy if you have a well-developed e-health system, doesn't work so well in developing countries. How do we get the health authorities, clinics, also the vaccine manufacturers who need to know what's happening with their vaccines to real-time situational awareness? How do we, of course, ultimately, how do we do something like manage patient onboarding, even deal with the scheduling, the queuing questions around these vaccinations? And finally, how do we put individuals in charge of their data as much as possible? This is also not a short-term problem. You know, I think if you're in Europe, the US, or developed countries in Asia, you think, hey, you know, I've gotten my vaccines now, or I'm about to get them, and it's done by the summer. The reality is we're going to be in this for a couple of years. And it's possible, depending on how the virus mutates, that we're going to be in this all with new variants and new forms of vaccination for many years to come. So we need to have a more holistic approach to how we actually approach this. And this is something that we've been working with the Estonian government and the World Health Organization on for the last year, which is basically to understand all the different participants that need to be part of this data ecosystem. I forgot the last bullet here, most important one, which is how we put people in charge of their data. We need to have a broader approach to this data ecosystem that actually lets us get all of the business outcomes that we need to have, that avoids, of course, the traps and the risks that Teemu, you mentioned before, which is that big businesses end up sitting on top of the data. We have exploitation of the data. And so the challenge for us all is how do we actually do that? And so this slide is something that the World Health Organization initially put together, which just kind of gives us a partial mapping of some of the scenarios we need to have and be working with. And the ones at the top, of course, are the ones that everyone's familiar with. So you get vaccinated, and obviously that has to involve personal data because it's a linking of the digital twin of the vaccine to the digital twin of you. And then you want to go and use that, whether that's for international travel, potentially for domestic use cases. But then there are also some other use cases out there where various parties have a fairly societally justifiable need to get access to various parts of the data. First of all, there's monitoring the actual supply chain, dealing with, for instance, the risk of counterfeit vaccines. Again, not something we necessarily see in the developed world, But if we look across the developing countries, if we look, for instance, at UNICEF, UNICEF's challenge at administering vaccines to children across the world, and counterfeit vaccines become a serious problem. Then we have the need to have sort of public health monitoring of what's going on, often in the decentralized countries, countries that have poor connectivity, poor overall availability of data. And finally, you know, big business gets a bad rap, but there is a need for the pharmaceutical companies that are developing these vaccines to get high quality data about what's actually going on with the vaccines, both in terms of adverse effects, so if someone falls ill from the vaccine, as well as to understand how the variants actually react to different vaccines, and knowing 6-12 months out, you know, do we need to be giving people 3rd and 4th doses? And so I just want to share a couple of quick reflections on how this fits together with some of the values that MyData is working on. I think the first point is that we don't actually need to have a single massive central repository of data for this to work, either in individual countries or globally. And indeed, the framework that we've been working on with the World Health Organization is precisely around how to make this data sharing distributed. And with the technology and the frameworks that exist today, you can arrive at a lot of this business intelligence for pharmaceutical companies, for the public health authorities, without actually having to share personally identifying information. You can even, of course, as the MyData community would know well, have a lot of the individual use cases work without having to share the PII, even though we're not necessarily doing that right now. And so we should set the bar fairly high, minimize the places where PII sharing really is needed. The one place where it is important is when you fall ill, you need to go and recreate that link between your individual and the vaccine you were administered, so that you can actually come back and have the pharma say, okay, I know it was my vaccine and not, for instance, another pharma's vaccine, and it was this dose that caused the adverse reaction, or that wasn't able to hold off the infection. I also want, you know, MyData solves some bottlenecks here. For instance, if we look at the top, there's been a difficulty for people who get vaccines in multiple countries, where they're not actually able to get their vaccine passes because the way they're generated is because the data is siloed in national health information systems. And so having more healthcare data portability and recognition of that data is very helpful for actually letting people pull together their data to have their vaccine pass. But it's also the case that in this broader discussion of the different parties, the weakest party is the end user. The one thing that the end user isn't in the case of COVID-19 vaccines is a customer. And so because generally individuals aren't paying for their vaccines, you also lack, I think, some of the business case pressures that we've been speaking about in the MyData community over the last couple of years to get people in charge of their data. It's certainly what we've seen as we've tried to talk about, okay, how do we make the data more portable for individuals in addition to creating these business use case scenarios? Political pressure is really important. Politics and politicians works a lot better than civil servants. So I think we still have a lot of work here to do to really build these MyData principles into how the information sharing is working. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and there's a good chance we'll get this less wrong than a lot of data sharing in the past. Okay, well, I don't know if I went over my time. I wasn't measuring myself there.
All right. Thank you, Lucas. Yeah, thank you for that. Indeed, definitely there's some controversies there, and we've had those controversial or discussions about those controversies in the community as well. And again, if I can ask you to hop over to the Mentimeter and let's get a sentiment from the audience. What do we see? And Lucas, tell me your kind of perceptions on these results. And thanks everybody for already submitting your results.
Well, I'm of course following the middle two columns. I'll tell you what the internal discussion we've had is. It's a philosophical one ultimately. Do you want to actually build a wonderful MyData ecosystem around this information sharing in the first place? Because the counter view is that actually what 16% are saying is that this should be a temporary measure, that in fact, using immune status to make these business decisions around individuals' sort of lives and behavior is something we should have only as long as we need to. And as soon as we have herd immunity, we should really get rid of that entire category of data sharing and go back to having that more locked down and silent. And I will admit, I would answer that question differently on different days. So sometimes I'd be in the 67%, and there are some days I'd be in the 18%, in part because the problem with the 67% is, in spite of my optimism around these these frameworks getting better. I think we're still pretty far from getting everything right. And it's a challenge to get out of the big data silos into more distributed sharing. So I would say a qualified yes for myself too, with the 2/3 here. It says only if we can follow strong MyData principles.
Okay, and you want a fifth category there. They're ambivalent. All right, good. Thanks, Lucas, and great to see and hear from you again. And on we go to the fourth spotlight presentation. So Christina Yasuda from Microsoft, and talking about identity. Of course, that was, I think, one of the big ones highlighted in the start. I don't know if Christina, maybe you weren't on the call, but when we were asking what topic around MyData are people working on, I think identity was among the top ones mentioned. So I think we're eager to hear from you. What are the business opportunities and what does the world look like from a corporate point of view? So over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Teemu. Yeah, I was in the beginning, and I was actually very impressed to see a lot of identity people on the call. And thank you so much for organizing. This is great. So my name is Christina, and I'm very happy to be here presenting to you about what I called MyData and big corporations. And I put big fat question mark because I'm not here really to give you any answers, but rather to pose I hope, the right questions to get the conversation going, because I'm really happy that this topic is starting to be discussed, and I want more people to pay attention to this. So do I click here? Does it move? Okay, it does. So just to give you some context, so to give you a better idea of where I'm coming from. So I do work in identity. So for me, right to self-determination regarding personal data from MyData Declaration, I do tend to understand it first in terms of digital identity. And I have been working on decentralized identity in particular, both in nonprofits and big corporations. So I was an Accenture before joining Microsoft. So I hope I am slightly less biased because of this experience. And Microsoft did authorize me to speak about this, but I just want to say that opinions are my own in the end of the day, because I do wear different hats. So to start with a couple of questions. So as a board member of MyData, both global and Japan, I was thinking a lot, what does it take to get Microsoft join MyData? But before we get there, is it really a good idea? Was where it was starting. So first question being, how can MyData benefit from this relationship with big corporations? And first I put big corporations in parentheses because I'm not going to define that here. That can mean different things to different people. But let's say it's a company with a big user base that does handle a lot of personal data, right? And you would have different benefits and probably disadvantages too, and I'd like to hear about them, to be honest. But from my perspective, one thing that came out big was, if we want to make it happen, make it right for the individuals, big companies that do have user base, we should take advantage of them. We should use them, if not choosing the words, right? And so Microsoft Identity, I'm not talking about other divisions, has 1 billion monthly active users, which is slightly bigger than 750 million of EU populations. So, and Microsoft is building some solutions, and I'm sure the goal is to reach this 1 billion, right? And it better be right. And second question I was asking, if we do want to go forward with this relationship, which big corporations are serious about personal data and MyData principles? And again, serious can mean different things, but my main message here is, I think in our conversations, we do take Facebook's and Google's as sort of main representatives of big corporations, but I'm just trying to sort of illustrate that there are other corporations that are trying to get it right, because the struggle is real. And I'll talk about this soon, but the struggle is real, and I'll touch upon what is serious has been in my experience. So then the question is, how can big corporations benefit from MyData, and how can we convince them, if they want them to be more involved? And I think some of on the call have been facing a similar struggle. So I'm not here to convince you that Microsoft is great or whatever. I'm just offering this as a case study, because we did make mistakes. So in 2010, Microsoft open sourced what was called U-Proof framework and built a product called InfoCards on top of it. And I was just rereading the press release back in 2010. And what really surprised me was the promise of a press release was preventing impersonation, preventing relying party tracking, and allow selective disclosure. So literally the press release says, we want to enable users to visit websites and make purchases without those sites being able to track us or combine different pieces of information to draw a more complete picture of us. And this is even before Cambridge Analytica, right? I mean, I'm sure it was done back then too, but before it all came to surface, right? And obviously end users loved it. We love it. And identity providers, the governments, banks, credit card companies who face a lot of audit charges also liked it. But why it didn't fly, why probably none of you have heard of the service is because, well, if you're an identity, probably you have heard it, is because of adoption. There was no adoption because the service providers didn't get buy-in. Basically, e-commerce platforms told that, for example, e-commerce, right? They don't want to let go of their current use of extensive offshore data, and they want to keep determining trends and making suggestions based on that, because that's how they make business. So that was a failed attempt, right? Well, based on these learnings, right now, Microsoft is trying to build what is called verifiable credential service. 10 years fast forward, probably now the time is better. And so I think we're making much more progress. But as I said in the beginning, there are serious struggles, right? To get the adoption, to get the principles right. And then I go back to my keyword serious. That's why you see us participating in communities, in being serious about standardization, sharing experience, open sourcing. And I'm not to say that, that means we should all focus on big corporations. No, it's important for us to keep investing and supporting, new companies with great visions and great ideas. But I'm just saying, if there's a big corporations that are actually being serious, and you should set your own plan for serious, but we should not probably, just say you're big, you're bad, because sometimes that does seem to happen. So in the end, the question I want to be posing is, how can MyData community create a win-win relationship with corporations with a significant user base that is serious about MyData principles? And I understand this is a limited time frame, and I may have caused some misunderstanding, but if this is provoking some strong emotions or strong opinions, I'm more than happy. And so I'm responsible for standardization of the technology behind this verifiable credential service that Microsoft is building right now. I shouldn't say responsible, I'm just one of the team members contributing, right? But I mean, no one can get it right from the very beginning, right? It's a step-by-step process, and I hope we can get there step-by-step together. So me wearing a bit more of Microsoft hat than usual. So thank you.
Thanks, Christina. And certainly it's something that's not coming instantly, and we look forward to, of course, engaging also with the bigger companies, and at the same time making sure that we make it happen and we make it right, like you said. And certainly it doesn't always come right the first time. Can I ask you once again, and thank you to those who already made it there, benefits for large corporations? Okay, I see some smileys there, but I see also some serious business standing out, trustworthiness, gaining trust, of course, an important part of what we do. Okay, keep giving us feedback here. Christina, anything you see that is interesting here?
keep us accountable. That's very important. The MyData's bottom-up approach should not change. So I love this. I hope this discussion will continue in Slack, hopefully.
All right. And I have a sense that I will be held accountable for keeping time. So with that, let's move on to our group discussions facilitated by our community heroes, Kuhn on interoperability, Alessandro on design, and Gülsen on data literacy. And you will have a chance to join the one that you want. And for those who are on mobile, it may not be available for you. We will put you in one of these discussions. We'll have 20 minutes discussion before we wrap up with next steps. And at this time, I can thank everybody who has been, well, first I want to thank also stream viewers, our staff who has put this together. Thanks Ansku and Karo, who you have not seen yet, in addition to Sille, Vivi, and all our speakers. But thanks everybody who has been watching the stream. We continue with the group discussions. And thanks Tarmo for all the